Joe, Sergei Lavrov and his crew were having some problems arriving in United States, and we've heard the same old song, the same old story. We've heard, well, actually, we've heard Dmitry Medvedev singing this song for a couple of weeks right now. So we got United States running a crusade against Russia. We got actually United States organizing a war, invasion on Russia in a way. And we don't have Sergei Lavrov's crew in United States.
Russia, for this month of April, Russia is holding the rotating presidency of the Security Council of the United States, which is, I mean, you think about how ridiculous that is while they're unleashing this hell, not only on Ukraine, but on the world. But the United States, of course, follows their UN obligations. And so the Russian foreign minister is indeed in New York. And the Russian propaganda, I think they're well aware that there's a lot of people in America that are, prices are high, they're tired, they don't trust the government, and they're skeptical of what's happening here. And so Lavrov is very adept at feeding into these false narratives. And so he said, everyone understands that the U.S. has declared a crusade against Russia and Russia's legitimate interest. And then he said that there's been a crusade launched not only against the Russian Federation, but against Russian culture and traditions. And, this feeds into this narrative that Russia is the great beacon of tradition and decency in the world. And,
Sorry, can't stop laughing. We're talking about the same culture that made this great novel about guy killing a grandma and thinking why it's bad to kill a grandma?
Yeah, and not only making novels, but actually doing that, by the continued shelling of cities.
So it's a part of implementing this culture.
Well, yeah, and I think a very interesting way to look at this, in Soviet times, and we got to, because the Americans who sort of don't realize Russian evil today, they all speak to how, evil communism is. And in Soviet times, Moscow destroyed culture, religion, and tradition. And so this is why, for example, in eastern Ukraine, you can see it even in the architecture of cities in eastern Ukraine where Moscow really controlled the people. In Dnipro, in Kharkiv, you can see it in the modern architecture, but also the people speak Russian because the Ukrainian language was illegal in those places, going back to the days of the Tsars, but especially under Soviet times. And so in Ukraine, in eastern Ukraine, they spoke Russian. And they didn't have, they lost their connection to traditions. It was here in Western Ukraine where, especially in the mountains and here in Lviv, where people held on to their traditions during the dark time of the Soviet era. And now that people from the east of Ukraine are coming to the West, I saw this the past week with the Easter celebrations. They're amazed that the culture is so rich here. And so what is actually under threat is culture, and it's under threat from Russia. Russia is doing everything they can. I mean, they've bombed churches. They've even bombed the site of one of the massacres from the Holocaust outside of Kyiv, which is very sacred, that spot to Jewish people in Kyiv. The Russians, that was one of the first places they bombed. The Muslim people from the Crimean Peninsula, the Tatar people, have been oppressed always by Moscow and still in occupied Crimea. And so it is Russia that is attacking culture. And if you think about it, people in Dublin speak English, not because they're British. It's because for centuries, British imperialism banned their own language. And by the same token, that's why people in eastern Ukraine speak Russian. And so these narratives from Lavrov are totally false. And on a deeper level, it's what makes Ukrainians Ukrainians, and especially you can see it in that revolution of 2014, the Maidan Revolution, is that whatever language they speak, they insist on being free. And I think everyone can agree there is no such freedom in Moscow. There is no freedom of speech. Everything is about Putin.
But there's something deeper here, because from perspective of Central Europe, from perspective of country like Poland that used to be under Russian occupation for, I don't know, like 200 years, or maybe more, depending how you count the last 50 years of communism, for example. So for us here in Ukraine, in Poland, in Lithuania, Latvia, countries of the so-called NATO eastern flank, it's clear. We know what the Russian mir means. But when Sergei Lavrov comes to United States and he claims that his culture is being under attack by United States, we are talking about the culture of Bucha, we are talking about the culture of Irpin, we are talking about the culture of Bykownia, of Katyn, 25,000 people, Polish soldiers killed with a bullet in the head. We are talking about the culture of Gulag, we are talking about the culture of Golodomor, of millions of people starved to death by Russia, and we are talking about the culture of war that is supported by the majority of like 80% of Russians right now. So what the hell Sergei Lavrov is talking about, it's quite clear. But what puzzles me is there are people in the free world that listen to him as if he was speaking truth. That puzzles me.
Yeah, and well, I think, and that's that's one reason why, my role here as a reporter here in Ukraine is to show people what Ukraine really is, because that's what, in order for Russia to get support around the world, they have to smudge over the idea of Ukraine and make it into and that's what, they always say Ukraine is a puppet of the United States. And these things are just, they're not true whatsoever. For example, like the 2014 revolution, Ukrainians took charge of their country. Ukraine was on the way to becoming more and more like Russia, which they controlled it for so long. And in 2014, the people put the brakes on it and said, we will not be like that. But we have to look if you look closely, like when Russia launched its full-scale invasion February 24th, United States did not rush in to help Ukraine. So this narrative that Ukraine is simply a puppet of the U.S. and the United States push for this war is totally false. And one way to illustrate that, do you remember, Mihał, when the U.S. Embassy left Ukraine? It was early February 2022, weeks before Russia invaded. Now, when did the American Embassy leave Sudan? Just in the past 30 hours. So the capital of Sudan was already a dangerous place, with war happening there, and the American Embassy still held on through that. But the American Embassy left Ukraine weeks before the invasion began. This is astounding. It almost was an invitation. It was saying, don't worry, if you attack Kyiv, we're gone. There's no chance that you'll hit us. And so it's easy to forget that now, because the politicians have cloaked themselves in the colors of Ukraine, and they talk about how much they support Ukraine, and they throw out.
But Joe, this is very interesting from another perspective. Before we started this program, you sent me a very interesting and scary in a way, and sad. Maybe it's better to say that it's sad than scary in a way, of an American comedian. Sure, this guy has lots of very interesting texts and videos about the freedom, as you told me. I'm not pretending that I've heard about this guy before, but he's got some decent public in the United States, and he's ridiculing in a way the American help, financial help, military help to Ukraine, and I wonder what is the reason for which at least part of people like this do not understand that the reason for which United States is in some very important parts of the world considered not only a world policeman, but as a power that secures nations from the powers that are trying to give away their freedom. In Poland, we remember Ronald Reagan as this kind of politician. I mean, it's a kind of duty of a country that holds the position of the superpower, the only superpower in the world right now. It gives some points on the international scene. It gives some points in terms of the economical and political positions. But there are some duties related to this, and helping Ukraine in a way is a price you have to pay to be a world superpower.